The face of human resource related laws is changing. With the changes are ethical dilemmas and barriers to sustaining past ethical successes. In reviewing current ethical issues related to affirmative action, OSHA, EAW, child labor, gender equity, and compensation, and evidence that change is inevitable is found. Through the enactment of affirmative action, ethical and equal access for employees, federal contractors, and college students was sought. The emphasis is on opportunity. Affirmative action programs are meant to break down barriers, both visible and invisible, to level the playing field, and to make sure everyone is given an equal break. OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is ethically important because it establishes safety guidelines for U.S. businesses. These guidelines ensure that companies follow safe work practices, provide hazard and safety training, and provide protective equipment for employees. The agency enforces these guidelines through inspections and investigations of injuries and accidents. Although the Employment at Will doctrine was enacted to provide equal footing for employees, there are exceptions to protect from unjust actions by the employer. The most widespread exception prevents terminations for reasons that violate a state's public policy. Another widely recognized exception prohibits termination after an implied contract for employment has been established. Such a contract can be created through employer representations of continued employment, in the form of either oral assurances or expectations created by employer handbooks, policies, or other written assurances. Finally, a minority of states has read or implied covenant or of good faith and fair dealing into the employment relationship. The good faith covenant has been interpreted in different ways, from meaning that employer terminations must be for cause to meaning that terminations can be made in bad faith or with malice intent. Children for many years were an accepted labor pool. Stateside laws prohibit children of a particular age from working in certain fields and during certain hours. With the exception, there is always room for improvement due to noncompliance. Thinking of children as more than just an economic value eventually helped change the role of children of the working class in American society. A child's ethical place is in the classroom, preparing for their future. Gender equity in the United States has improved greatly. However, there are glass ceilings that continue to be unbroken. In order to level the playing ground and keep ethical momentum, champions of cause of gender equality are needed. Compensation is a hot topic with regard to overtime pay ruling. Employers and employees are involved in ethical dilemmas in enacting the new ruling. Employers that raise the salaries of other employees to comply with the new thresholds could create operational or morale issues for those whose salaries are not being adjusted. It is not difficult to conceive of situations where complying with a rule by only addressing the compensation of those who fall below the threshold will result in a lower level employee leapfrogging over a higher level employee in terms of compensation, or where it results in the unwanted salary compression. Salary shifts could also affect any analysis of whether a new compensation structure adversely affects individuals in protected categories. Affirmative. As President Lyndon Johnson said in 1965, you do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of race, and then say you're free to compete with all the others, and still just believe that you have been completely fair. Affirmative action was enacted in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy, with the idea that employees would equally provide access to opportunities regardless of race, creed, color, or national origin. In 1967, President Johnson amended the order to include sex on the list of attributes Executive Order 11246 also requires federal contractors to take affirmative action to promote the full realization of equal opportunity for women and minorities. Executive Order 11246 also requires federal contractors to take affirmative action to promote the full realization of equal opportunity for women and minorities. On July 20th, 1995, the Board of Regents of University of California adopted Regents Resolution SP1 and SP2. In effect, SP1 required that race, religion, sex, color, ethnicity, and natural origin not be considered in the admissions decisions process. Federal agencies will not have to adopt new plans to hire more disabled individuals and provide more assistance to them at their offices under a new rule from agency tasked with preventing workplace discrimination. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, issued a final rule this week spelling out affirmative action for individuals with disabilities in federal employment. These efforts are to further advance the opportunities that do not exist for those disabled individuals seeking employment. Today, the face of disabled Americans include those who fought hard for the rights and freedom we all benefit from. All federal agencies must begin in 2018 striving to compose 12% of their workforces with disabled individuals, including 2% who have what EEOC, the Office of Personnel Management, define as targeted disabilities. To ensure disabled employees can advance up the ranks, agencies must create mentoring programs, training initiatives, and exit interviews that can help determine lingering shortfalls. Agencies must also create anti-harassment policies. The new regulations will not come cheap. EEOC estimated that these will cost the federal government between $23 million and $71 million. OSHA. A total of 4,836 fatal work injuries were recorded in the United States in 2015. This is a slight increase from the 4,821 fatal injuries reported in 2014. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has reported in 2015 census of fatal occupational injuries. This represents a significant increase from 2009 when the fewest number of workers suffered fatal injuries on the job. The annual total of 4,836 fatal workplace injuries was also the highest since 5,214 fatal injuries in 2008. Every ethnicity of worker is affected by noncompliance with OSHA standards. Non-Hispanic, Black, or African American workers incurred 495 fatal injuries in 2016. The type of jobs that are most impacted by fatal injuries include construction work, and the predominant ethnicity employed in this industry are the Hispanic Latino workers. Fatal injuries involving Hispanic or Latino workers rose 12% in 2015 to 903 fatalities, up from 804 in 2014. While women accounted for 43% of the hours worked in 2015, they accounted for only 7% of the fatal injuries. Most recently, the laws that we traditionally look to govern our physical work are indulged in means of ethical protecting employees against retaliation for medical options taken. The Affordable Care Act, ACA, added Section 18C to the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, to prohibit retaliation against employees who engage in certain activities protected by ACA. The final rules clarify the purposes of the ACA's anti-retaliation provision, which are: an employee is considered to have received a premium tax credit or cost-sharing reduction not only when the credit is allowed on the individual's tax return, but also when an exchange finds the employee eligible for a credit or cost-sharing reduction. Employment at will. James Allen stated, "Work joyfully and peacefully, knowing that right thoughts and right efforts will inevitably bring about right results." Ralph Waldo Emerson stated, "See only that thou work, and thou canst not escape the reward." But authors describe a method of working to receive the both authors, described a method of working to receive the most intrinsic rewards. The employment at will doctrine was created to provide a means of releasing those employees who do not hone in on the characteristics that benefit the employer or the customer. Employment without a written employment contract generally can be fired, employees without a general employment contract or written employment contract can be fired for good cause, bad cause, or no cause at all. Judicial exceptions to the rule seek to prevent wrongful terminations. To set both parties on equal footing, provisions for the employer were enacted through the EAW To set both parties on equal footing, provisions for the employer were enacted through the EAW. Employees could resign freely and employers could release from employment freely. The legislative session in January resulted in adjustments to the previously protected federal employment status for workers. Republican Todd Rokita of Indiana laid out his plan to reintroduce the Promote Accountability and Government Efficiency Act to turn all new federal workers into at-will employees. The measure would strip new federal hires from due process protections, instead allowing supervisors to fire them without notice or the opportunity to appeal. It would also allow agencies to immediately suspend current feds without warning and without and would prohibit any employees not receiving top marks on their performance reviews from getting a pay raise. Child labor. The Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, prescribes regulations for the occupations, ages, and durations of time children may work. Currently, children work under the age of 14, but are prohibited from working. Children's ages 14 and 15 can work with strict regulations. Children 14 and 15 are allowed to work in retail food service and gasoline service establishments. Children 14 and 15 are restricted to working during school hours more than 40 hours when school is not in session, 18 hours a week when school is in session, more than 8 hours in a non-school day, more than 3 hours in a school day, and between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., except in the summer when evening work is limited to 9 p.m. Many of the restrictions are lifted for 16 to 7-year-old children. However, the safety standards of working with limited materials are still in place. Today, child labor, like seen in World War II and in the decades past leading up to the passage of FLSA, no longer exists. Although children under 16 have been excluded from the Bureau of Labor Statistics labor force data since 1967. When children do work, it is most commonly when school is out of session. This is not to say the problem of child labor has vanished. It is estimated that in any given week, 153,600 children are employed at an activity in violation of the FLSA or state law. Gender pay gaps persist around the world, including in the United States. The global gender pay gap ranges from 3% to 51%, with a global average of 17%. Equality in pay has improved in the U.S. since 1979, when women earned about 16% as much as men. In 2010, American women on average earned 81% of what their male counterparts earned. Women are 50% more likely to work in the public sector. Women surpass men on the education attainment among those employed aged 25 and over. 37.1% of women hold at least a bachelor's degree compared to 34.9% of men. While women make up 51.5% of all managers, much fewer women rise to the C-suite. A survey of 25,000 Harvard Business School graduates found that although male and female graduates had similar levels of ambition, men were significantly more likely to have positions in senior management, direct reports, and a profit and loss responsibility. Men have been found to be championing the efforts of women to break the glass ceiling. Generally, we saw that male champions have earned or learned that gender inclusiveness means involving both men and women and advancing women's leadership. The ethical dilemma facing men for their own preservation to encourage the rightful seat at the table for women is overlooked. Gender inclusive leadership that support women's career advancements are using their authority to push workplace and culture towards gender equality, thinking of gender inclusiveness as part of effective talent management, providing gender-aware mentoring and coaching, participating in focused leadership, and not self-focused leadership. The federal overtime provisions are contained in the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. Unless exempt, employees covered by the Act must receive overtime pay for hours worked over 40 in a work week at a rate not less than time and one-half the regular rates of pay. The Act does not require overtime pay for work on Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, or regular days of rest, unless overtime is worked on such days. The Act applies on a work week basis. An employee's work week is fixed in regularly recurring period of 168 hours, 7 consecutive 24-hour periods. It need not coincide with the calendar week, but may begin on any day and at any hour of the day. Different work weeks may be established for different employees or groups of employees. Averaging of hours over 2 or more weeks is not prohibited. Normally, overtime pay earned. The U.S. Department of Labor announced its final rule to increase the minimum salary for white-collar exemptions effective December 1st, 2016. Only days before the new rule was to go into effect, a United States District Court judge in the Eastern District of Texas enjoined the implementation of the rule, concluding that the DOL had overstepped its statutory authority. Ethically, the attempt was to level the playing field for those working an inordinate amount of hours, diminishing the actual amount per hour they earned. However, there are provisions in our government to allow states to have certain statutory authorities. If the appeal is successful and the injunction reversed, employers will need to decide how to address those otherwise exempt employees whose current salaries would not satisfy the new rule, by either increasing their salaries or converting them to non-exempt status. The salary threshold for the executive, administrative, and professional exemption was expected to double, increasing from $23,660 annually, or $455 per week, to $47,476, or $913 per week. In summation, affirmative action was originally enacted to increase opportunities for protected class, ethnicity, age, gender, etc., then federally employed individuals, then individuals of protected classes seeking collegiate opportunities. Now, we look at a new ethical arena for affirmative action, disabled Americans. OSHA has transitioned as well to include ethical assumptions regarding protections for employees who engage in certain ACA activities. The previously protected class of federal workers under contract may not have the same ethical standards afforded them, but rather be expendable, employed at will. Women make up about half the U.S. workforce, drive 80% of consumer buying decisions, and represent 60% of global university graduates. Gender balance is a big business opportunity with huge economic implications. It boosts bottom line results, drives growth with new customer insights, and enhances productivity with better talent acquisition and retention. Companies whose executive teams are more gender balanced report higher profitability and return on equity. Compensation for overtime work is in ethical limbo. The new overtime laws that went into effect last year come with much debate. A salary increase of $5,000 for a single employee to meet the new salary threshold may not have a substantial impact upon many employers, But what if the employer would need to give that 5,000 increase to 500 employees across the country to maintain their exempt status? Suddenly, maintaining the exemption under the potential new rule would carry a $2.5 million price tag. In all arenas are in some way in human resource ethical transition.